Hey, welcome to Hell in the Hallway podcast with your host Billy, and we are on part two of our segment of relationship help, and that this is crazy than what's happening in terms of what can happen in our relationships. And I had so many good questions from before that I had to break it up in a two-part sequence. And in the first part, I was kind of acknowledging the fact that we're in this quarantine and it's got my hair all crazy, so forgive. And my nails, you're gonna see some missing nails there, and I'm just falling apart, folks. So pray for me. So we have a good question from an anonymous person, and I'll leave this person anonymous. And this person speaks. How do you break the habit of staying in relationships long after the expiration date? And this person was speaking of relationships with either significant others and even good friends. And here's what I'll say that I think that's an awesome question. I use expiration date as a word quite often because I firmly believe that everything has an expiration date. And again, is what we choose to do once we recognize the expiration date has arrived. But here's what I'll say. Did you see things coming, right? Did you see the fact that it was that you were in something that really wasn't feeding your soul or your spirit anymore? And so you could do one or two things, right? So let's talk about it from a preventative method, right? You could talk to the person. You could decide like, hey, I'm noticing that I'm not growing, I'm not developing, or we're not growing, we're not developing in this relationship. You can if you start to recognize that the relationship is starting to be more like an anchor than like a wing, then it's time to make some decisions in that hey, I gotta cut this out. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. But you don't have to just end a relationship because you're recognizing that it is that you're no longer growing in it, right? You can start to recognize that slowly but surely these relationships are ending up in a coma like status, right, where you're kind of just existing and you're not growing and you're not thriving, you're just surviving. And that's when you start having the conversation. And people struggle with having these difficult conversations on relationships, right? Forgive me, I'm trying to get back to my questions. They struggle with having these conversations, and they think that people are going to reject them if they start to have it, or they're going to feel like the other person's being rejected. And I'm going to do a whole different podcast on the idea of rejecting the person or a rejection experience, because those are two separate experiences. I do think it's important, though, Anonymous, that you have a conversation with this person and let them know where you are, because honestly, this is the only life you got. This is it. This is the show. We are on stage, right? And what are you going to do? Are you going to live your life miserable or with this undercurrent of resentment because you really want this person to go away and it's not happening? But you're also not being honest with them. You're not letting them know. You're not saying, hey, we need to do something, or I need to move on, right? You can do that. That's something that I hold you responsible for. If this is what your current situation is to have the conversation, the difficult conversation, for you both to make a decision to get help on your relationship and to prosper and move forward from that point on. Because I do think it's possible. I even think it's possible that that relationships can thrive despite and even because of infidelity. I do believe that. It's really all in the work and all in the level of vulnerability, because I do believe that's symptomatic of a greater problem, right? But as it pertains to your question, is being authentic with yourself. Is, are you prepared to sit down with this person, talk to them, and let them know where you are? And if you want to move forward, see, some people will be long after the expiration date and don't want to move forward. That's when it's time for you to kind of give a person the gift of your exit. Okay? That's a hard statement, but it's the truth. Give them the gift of your exit, because in that moment, you're not truly giving it your all anyway. Okay? So, Anonymous, thank you so much for your question. I think it was valid. I thought it was an awesome question. And I think it's a question that, a situation that a lot of people find themselves in, right? So, thanks a lot. The next question I got that I was not able to say on the first time is from Brittany McLean of Cleveland, Ohio. Is it important to be vulnerable in a relationship? And if so, how vulnerable? Excellent question, because honestly, Brittany, I think that relationships can only be as strong as the level of vulnerability that both partners are willing to give. I think people should be extremely vulnerable, because guess what it calls for? It calls for a level of safeness. So you have to feel safe in order to be vulnerable. So when you feel safe and you're vulnerable, you develop trust. When you develop trust, this relationships become the foundation of it becomes so strong that you're going to encounter a lot of storms in relationships, and you can weather them because your foundation is strong, right? But when your foundation isn't strong because you both have chosen not to be vulnerable, or one person has not, then it's going to be shaky, and it's going to be easily moved and easily disrupted, right? I firmly believe that your mate should be a best friend of yours. It shouldn't be just somebody you're having a romantic encounter with, right? If the first person you call when you're struggling is not your mate, there's something wrong, because that means you don't trust that person, right? Now, and what I mean by trust, I don't mean that you're thinking they're cheating or anything like that. That also means you might think that they can't hold space for your pain. And in relationships, each relationship, and I'm not talking about these early stage relationships, right? Because that develops over time. But what I mean is relationships that are established, there should be enough safeness in that. Well, both partners feel like they can be vulnerable and hold space for each other. And by hold space, I mean cover one another, be there for one another, support one another, be willing to hear each other in their pain without judgment, and even asking what that person needs in that moment. Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to offer feedback? Do you just need me to hold you? What is it that you need? But we have to articulate those needs. And as partners, we have to be willing to give those needs as well. So thank you, Brittany. Awesome question. I have a question from Van Webb, his other question from Cleveland, Ohio. And his question reads, why do people stay in relationships after being disrespected by their mate and continue on knowing they will disrespect them again? Woo, that's an awesome question, Van, and that is something that I see happen a lot. That is no longer about the partner. No longer. That's about the person and why they're having a difficulty letting go of that particular attachment. It also means about the person who is staying in that relationship, the cyclical behavior that they're allowing themselves to be in. Where are they stuck at? See, many times that when we find ourselves in patterns, it's usually based on some old experience that we've encountered, some old trauma, and sometimes people think trauma is, oh, I got molested, I got raped, I got beat up, no. Trauma is not just those big things, right? Trauma is also in terms of emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse. These things allow us to struggle in moving forward. Now, here's what I will say, Van. If a person doesn't recognize their level of brokenness, they will continue in cyclical behaviors when it comes to relationships and stay with people who continue to hurt them, right? And it's because that might be their definition of love. Oh, this person loves me because this person is hurting me, because that's the only definition they've ever understood. And when you finally get a person in a clinical world where they can start to see their patterns, then they can change the lenses in which they view themselves, which will have no choice but change the lens in which they view others. So thank you so much for that question, Van. I thought it was awesome. Thank you for that. I have a question from George Goins of Cleveland, Ohio, and his question reads, how important is money in relationships? Awesome question, George, because that really depends on the person. So money is a huge issue in relationships, right? Because typically couples never have conversations about money. It's because we don't talk about our value and what money, how money is valued in our internal spaces, right? And money means different things to different people, right? If we're talking about where you are in the beginning of a relationship, That's an early discussion. That's what you have. What are you looking to do? What is your financial picture? And here's the thing: people think those are like scary questions in beginning of relationships, right? Not so scary. It's really about, are we on the same page? That's really what it's about. I'm all for potential. I'm all for people growing. I'm all for acknowledging that. But I'm also a fan of implementation. What are you actually doing to get into that financial picture that you're talking about, right? I also think the money question is different depending on how old you are, right? So let's say you are 20 years old, right? And you're starting a relationship. That's probably a different financial question than if you're 50 years old and you're starting a relationship. Like people like me, I'm almost 50 years old. It's crazy. So those are different questions, right? And they have different meanings and they're valid, because here's why. When a person is asking about your financial picture, when they're asking about money, what they're really asking, the undercurrent of that question, George, is about security. This person wants to know, are they secure in you? That's what they want to know. And if they don't feel secure and they feel like, oh, wow, that means our ground is going to be unstable, then that's going to be a problem. So, and I'm not talking about, when I speak about money and relationships, I'm not talking about people who feel like somebody got to go out and buy them $1,500 purses. I'm not going to even speak to that, because that's not my thing. And I think that's very superficial. I'm speaking to financial picture in terms of where we're going to move forward as a unit. What is our finances going to look at as a unit if we're together, And also, I'll speak to it as this just came to mind. It really depends on, I had somebody ask a question about dating, right? He says, how come somebody got to take a person out? Why can't they just come to their house and, and watch TV and I cook them something to eat, right? And I thought that was interesting. I said, well, why can't the other person value the other thing? And if you can't accept what they value, maybe that's just not the right person for you, right? So that's important to recognize. If you feel that, and I'm not talking about you, George, but I'm talking about in general, if a person says, hey, if my level of dating is that I don't have to take people out, my level of dating is that they come over and hang out with me, if they cool with that, so be it. But if that person says, hey, I want to go out, I want to be dated, I want to feel courted in this way, then you have to value that for that person. Doesn't mean you have to do it. It just means that you have to accept that that's what that person is accepting for themselves. So thanks a lot, George. That's an excellent question. And I have a couple of more questions. Let's see what we have. I have a question from Tanya Chambers, Cleveland, Ohio. These two questions that I didn't get to in the first segment. The first one, which is good. I have noticed in dating after divorce that there is a very little a man can do or say that impresses me without some level of consistency. Why do you think men are inconsistent? So this is her question. Whew. Hold on. That is coffee in there. I really wish it was something else sometimes, but why do I think men are inconsistent? So again, I always try to at least try to offer some balance in my podcast. If I'm not offering balance, please let me know, because I really want to be equitable in my responses for men and women, because I think that's important. I'm not here to tear down men, and I'm also not here to not be honest either. But I'm also not here to tear down women. So it's important that we're equitable, meaning we're sharing responsibility and ownership, right? So inconsistent. I completely agree with you that consistency is important. That means you listen with your eyes and not your ears. And that's what I was speaking about in the previous question regarding when you're 20, you're like, oh my God, he is amazing. He's going to be this, he's going to be that. And it's all about potential. It's all about what he's saying, because you're seeing something that can be. That's a different conversation sometimes when you're 50 years old and you're like, oh, okay, you start recognizing the mortality of your life, and that at the time you're on the other half of your life at this point. And why do I think men are inconsistent? Let me shift your question on why people are inconsistent. I think people are inconsistent because people only do what they actually value and not what they say they value, right? And here's an example of that, right? So I can't go to the gym right now, but I love going to the gym, right? and in my mind, I like to say that I value health. I value being healthy. But I can go to the gym and then go to the office and eat a bagel with cream cheese and not think twice about it. Like, I can do that, you know? And what I realized, it wasn't health that I valued, it was strength. I enjoy gym for the strength, and I feel for how my lungs feel, that I feel like, because I can't run anymore, but I enjoy strength. I value strength, not health like I thought. So then that prompted me to go through multiple values that I hold. What do I actually value? And we have to hold people accountable to their values. If they say they're valuing this and yet they're doing that, you don't really value that. You really value something else. And sometimes we don't even know it until somebody brings it to us, right? And it's important that we stand our ground on what we value. But we also have to look at what our own values are, right? So for yourself, Tanya, on what are they being inconsistent about? That's important for you to look at as well. But I do believe at the end of the day, men and women alike are inconsistent because honestly, we do what we value, not what we say we value. And the piece that I will offer in terms of helping to shift that is that start writing down what your standards are for yourself. What are your standards? And not saying what you hope to do, right? So an example that I use, like my standard would be Billy is healthy. Billy is a healthy person. What are the rituals tied to that particular standard? Billy goes to the gym 4 days a week. Billy eats these type of foods in order to sustain her health. Billy engages in these type of practices to support her spirituality, her religious beliefs. Those are the things, those are the rituals associated with my standard that I say that I value. But we don't tend to do that. We don't put our values in practice. Ask people, how are you? What are your values? Start there. And then ask them, how are they showing their values? How are they demonstrating them? And then you'll watch people be a little confused because no one really asked that question, right? We all like to hear the game, but we don't like to see it. So you have a great other question, Tanya. Money and love. I have found that some men are intimidated if their mate makes more money than them. Why is this the case if you're fostering a relationship? That is an excellent question, and that speaks to society rules. That speaks to the fact that a man may feel intimidated and less productive if he's not making more money, right? You don't even have to do anything at all. That's really his projection showing out on you. That's his stuff, not yours. And that's a question that needs to be discussed early in the relationship. See, that's his security with himself if he feels intimidated by the fact that if you're making more money than him. And that also speaks to boiling it down to the salt. Why does he feel intimidated by it? What is the issue associated with it? Does he feel less than a man? And does he feel that way is because that is what he's been taught of what a man is supposed to be, a person to provide? What does that mean? You know, and sometimes people need help kind of going through that process because they don't have access to all those spaces in their heart and in their mind. And so a conversation is really important. I do completely agree that people struggle when their mate makes more. And I'm going to speak men to women relationships because that's when you see it the most, right? I do believe that in that relationship, again, it goes back to the rules. If you're okay, like I have some clients where the male is a stay-at-home dad, and he's completely cool with it. And it doesn't mean that he's doing less because he's not. He's a stay-at-home dad, you know. He's doing a lot, you know. And then she's the breadwinner, but she does not disrespect him or see him as something less than who he is because this is the choice that they made for their relationship. But Tanya, I really enjoyed your question. I think it's a valid question, but I do think it's about boiling it down to the salt on what the value is and what it means to him that you make more, right? And keep probing because it allows him to get in touch with the space on why he holds that particular value and where he got that messaging from. So once again, I really appreciate everyone who has provided these excellent questions this time around. And recognize again that relationships are, there's a revelation in relationships. It's totally not about the destination then, right? Because we are learning and becoming more of a sense of oneness as we move forward. That's what's supposed to happen. If you are two nations with a treaty, you're not going to make it. You need to be a kingdom, right? I foster kingdoms in relationships, not two nations with a treaty. Because all you're going to continue to do is look at defending yourself, defending your position, okay? So again, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being part of Hell in the Hallway, and I will talk to you soon.